τη σοδιά της ενσύρωσης, με την έννοια ότι η ενσύρωση είναι ένα τουρσάκι με τα ζώα, το οποίο πρέπει να διατηρηθεί ποιοτικό και σωστό για να έχουμε καλό αποτέλεσμα. Γιατί η καλή τροφή μας δίνει μια καλή υγεία και μας δίνει και ένα καλό αποτέλεσμα. Όλος ο αγώνας λοιπόν που δίνουμε είναι με τα καλά προϊόντα της Josera, με το Josilac, να μπορέσει να γίνει δεν φτάνει όμως με το Josilac μόνο, να γίνει και σωστά η επεξεργασία, το πάτημα, το μάζεμα, και το σκέπασμα, για να μπορέσουν να γίνουν όλα αυτά τα οποία πρέπει να γίνουν σωστά και να έχει αποτέλεσμα ο κτηνοτρόφος. Η επένδυση που έχουμε πει και τα προηγούμενα χρόνια, είναι η 4η χρονιά τώρα που κάνουμε αυτή τη δουλειά. Να πω ότι οι τιμές είναι οι ίδιες, δεν αλλάζουν. Οπότε θα είναι business as usual, όπως τα λέμε στα ελληνικά. Αυτό όπως και πέρσι και πρόπερσι. Και άρα μπορείτε να προμηθευτείτε όσοι δεν έχετε σπρέιερ από τον Γιώργο τον Μουζούρη, όσοι και συνήθως παίρνετε τον εμβολιαστή κόμπι, αλλά μπορεί να χρησιμοποιήσετε και γκράσο όσοι χρειάζεται για αυτή την εποχή. Έχουμε πολύ κόσμο ο οποίος έχει κάνει και έχει καλά αποτελέσματα. Η απόδοση της επένδυσης είναι στο 1 ευρώ, 6 ευρώ. Το μήνυμο που λέμε ότι είναι εξασφαλισμένο. Άρα δεν υπάρχει λόγος κάποιος να μην θέλει να κάνει σωστά τη δουλειά, γιατί έχει απόδοση αυτό το πράγμα. Οπότε δίνω το λόγο στον Τίμο να ξεκινήσει αμέσως. Ήθελα να ρωτήσω, γιατί είμαστε μικρό γκρουπ. Θέλετε να έχουμε άμεση μετάφραση ή θέλετε γιατί οι διαφάνειες όλες είναι στα ελληνικά.
Οι διαφάνειες, ναι.
Στα αγγλικά. Υπάρχει κάποιος που θα ήθελε ο Ακρίτας να μεταφράζει? Δεν ξέρω. Αν υπάρχει κάποιος που μπορεί να σηκώσει το χέρι να ανοίξει και να πει. Γιώργο, εσύ τους ξέρεις καλύτερα. Γιώργο.
Τάσο, νομίζω όταν αναγράφεται στα ελληνικά θα το καταλάβουν.
Ωραία. Οπότε...
Εγώ, I will say one thing. Timo, you can do it in English. Maybe sometimes Akritas will add something if he feels must be something added in Greek. But mainly you go in English and the people see the Greek slides. Okay?
Okay.
Save time and to answer more questions. Thank you very much. Timo is the manager of Josera for Josilac, for Inoculants, Silage Inoculants. So he's a very experienced person. Είναι ένας πολύ έμπειρος επαγγελματίας, ξέρει καλά τη δουλειά, θα μας ενημερώσει για τα καλά προϊόντα της Josera. Timo, you have the stage.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. So, Tassos, thanks a lot for the introduction, and welcome to everybody to this webinar about Josilac and Ensiling. I just would like, Tassos or Akritas, can you reduce your volume because it's repeating?
Yes.
Yeah, because I got an echo.
All the people or?
No, only you two have your mics on, which is fine, but we just need to lower the volume. Otherwise, I have the complete echo always in. But now it sounds good. So welcome everybody to this webinar. If there are any questions, please raise your hand and or interrupt me. Unfortunately, my Greek is limited to a few words, but I'm sure Akritas and Tassos can translate if necessary. So if we look at feed production on the farm, there are different feeds that are necessary for a good ruminant production. One of the feeds are the silage and grains, as well as hay. On a typical dairy ration, more than 50% of the dairy ration is actually silage. So if we look at silage, we're looking at more than 50% of the quality of the ration. But it's not also 50% of the quality of the feed. Feed costs are more than 50% or almost 50%, depending on the farm, of the total costs. Roughage is roughly two-thirds of the costs, and concentrates 15%. So basically, if we control the silage quality, if we control the silage quantity, what we have, we are a boss of two-thirds of the feed costs. So our aim should be to have the best quality of roughage as possible, to get the most milk out of the roughage as possible. So if we talk about ensiling and silaging process, this is how it works. We could stop here, but I think we have a look at some things more in detail. Basically, silaging has 4 points. We have on the one side, we have the harvest quality. We have the bunker preparation, where we put in the silage on a later stage. We have the silo management once it's opened. And then as a final result, we have the milk per kilogram roughage. How much milk can we get out of our roughages? So the harvest quality has few parameters where we need to look at. One is the nutrient content in the plant material. This is something which is influenced by the point of harvest, at the time of harvest. If we harvest early, we have less fiber. If we harvest later, we have more fiber. If we harvest early, we have comparably more sugar and higher digestibility. If we harvest later, we get more quantity, but less quality. Then looking at the weather, especially important in Central Europe, where we do have regular rains, and also during the summer, whether if you harvest during a mud season, when you get sand in, mud in, due to the rain, it's dirt. It's the silage is not as clean as it should be. Cleanliness, as I said, is a part of the weather, but also part of the machinery. If your pickup is too low, you pick up sand. If you pick up sand in the silage, sand has a pH buffering possibility, so the pH will never drop so far as it should be because of the sand. And sand doesn't contain any nutrients for the animals. Then we have the chop length. Chop length is directly influenced by the chopper, by the driver, by the ability of the driver. And then on the other side, we do have the harvest chain. How quick do I get the fresh feed from the fields to the bunker? How is the compaction on the bunker? How is the bunker preparation also plays in there? Are the guys ready at the bunker when the first feeds arrive? So looking at the nutrient content of corn, for example, when to cut it. On the start, we have the flowering, and then we start into maturing with the milk maturing. So it's the corn kernel is more or less white, has a milk. If you press it, there's a white liquid coming out. Then it stops with the milk maturity. Then it starts into the dough maturity. What is the difference? If we look in the early part, we have high sugar content and low starch, while it later transfers to more starch, less sugar. And this is something you can see on this white line here. The more the white line goes in here, in this direction, into the inner side of the kernel, the more starch you have, and the more white the kernel is, the more sugar you still have. So the best harvest point of time would be between in the middle of the milk maturity until the middle of dough maturity. This is somewhere where you should be harvesting. As I said, the later you go, the more starch you have. The earlier you go, the more sugar you have. So if we look at the bunker preparation, this is something which needs to be looked at on farm level. We have the construction, meaning how wide is it, how high is it, is it strong enough to keep all the silage in there. What happens with the water flowing out of the silage at a later point of time. Then the feeding rate with new material. If we go back to the harvesting chain is the determining factor of the feeding rate. If you have one compaction tractor running and you have 20 wagons throwing things at him, the silage, he cannot compact it as well as it should be. So if we look at a layer of around 20 centimeters on the silo pit, this tractor needs to compact every single layer. If the layers are getting too thick because he's too slow or there are too many wagons bringing silage, then the compaction is not as good as it should or could be. Then later on, we need to look at the airtight ceiling, because what we would like to have is an anaerobic fermentation. Anaerobic means without any oxygen. So this we only can achieve if we cover it completely airtight. We'll have a look at it. So if we look at silaging and siling, it's basically a generally quite uncontrolled process. What does it mean? We cut it, we bring it on the silo pit, we compact it, we cover it. That's it. That's all we do. We can have the influence during the harvesting chain. We can have the influence with silage inoculants. This is what we'll be talking about later. But once the silo pit is covered, there is nothing we can do anymore. So what we need to do is we need to, as I said, we need to stop the oxygen supply, because aerobic microorganisms can harm the silage. They will reduce the nutrient in the silo. And then as a second time, we need to have a rapid pH drop. And this is also where our products are coming in to inactivate proteases, hindering these negative bacteria, which are, for example, the enterobacteria as well as Clostridia. We need to hinder them by reducing the pH level in the silo pit. Looking at compaction, as I said, the compaction tractor is one of the key members of the harvesting chain. He basically, or she, depending on who's driving, determines how quick can the other colleagues come and throw silage at him. Because as I said, we have layers between 20 and 30 centimeters thick, and he needs to have enough time to compact them. So therefore, he is saying slower or faster. If he has waiting time, better than if he can't have any waiting time and he's just plowing and plowing the silo and doesn't get the compaction as necessary. Down below, you see a graph or a table with the different chopping length for grass and corn, and the diameter, as well as the compaction, what we need to achieve. So basically, for corn, we need to achieve somewhere between 230 and 270 kilos dry matter per cubic meter. And for grass, it's a little bit less. We're talking 160 to 230. Why is it so? Because we have grass usually has higher moisture content than corn silage. So if we now look at all these different things on the left side, what would be the best one to compact silo? Is it the horse? Is it the German army tank? You could also say it's a Greek army tank. Is it the tractor on below, which is used for making ski pists, or is it an elephant? So if we look at the total weight of each other, we have a 60-ton tank, we have an 11-ton tractor, 6-ton elephant, and a 1-ton horse. Basically, many people would now say, hey, 60-ton compaction sounds good. Let's take the tank. While 1-ton horse, there's not much weight. But what we really need to look at is the weight per square centimeter. So looking at the elephant, 1 square centimeter of his foot brings a weight of 600 grams. If we look at the tractor, which is used to plow snow in the Alps, because of the wide chains he has on which he runs, he has only 160 grams per square centimeters pressure. 60-ton tank only brings around 1 kilo pressure per square centimeter. So this is, yeah, it's better than the others. But if we look at a horse, because of the hoof size, where the horse is only walking on roughly 1 centimeter wide hoof, because this is the only part of the hoof that is having contact with the soil, we have a pressure of 14 kilos per square centimeters. So basically, we should all be compacting our silo pits with horses. I know this is not doable during these days, but we can also have a look at the tractor tires. Usually when we are on the fields, we have wide tires. Why? Because we would like to reduce the pressure, not to sink into the soil. But for silo compaction, we need actually a high pressure in the soil, which we only achieve with smaller tires. And also, the lower the surface, the smaller the surface on the silo pit, the higher the pressure on the silage, the more air we can get out. Looking at the airtight ceiling, there are basically two major steps, or 2 major foils to use. We have the foils on the side, and we have the foil on the top. So basically, we cover it from all sides. There are usually no foils on the bottom side, because we have concrete there and we have concrete on the bottom. We only need to cover it up here so that all the air from the outside stays outside. Of course, there will be some oxygen left in the silo pit, but this oxygen will be worked away or will be consumed by the microorganisms during the first days. Then once the first foil has been covered, we take the second one, and on top we usually suggest to use a bird net, because depending on the birds in the region, we have some crows in Germany that especially like to pick on silo pits and try to get things out there. So basically they destroy our airtight ceiling, but with a bird net, and their chances of succeeding in this is reduced. Looking at bale silage. Bale silage is the small version of the large bunker silage, meaning we have here complete cover in foil between 8 to 10 layers with a net below. here we need to have a look that the layers are enough, because here we can't use any bird net above. And if we're looking at the crows, they like to, as it's written also here, they like to pick on these things. This is especially what happens if a crow or any bird destroys it. What you see here, the white, is basically mold. So it's deteriorating the feet below, and there you see these holes from above. These are just birds, no deer, nothing. Deer would be completely tiered because of their hoofs, but these are just birds. So what we lose here is nutrients. Looking at the silo management at the final preparation or final influencing factor. Our silo management determines the fermentation success. It's also how do we uncover the silo pit, the aerobic stability of the silage, as well as the feeding rate. How do we uncover it? If we look at these two pictures here, what we see here is they only uncover what they need during the week or during the day. They're not uncovering half of the silo pit. And as seen as here, well, only as much as you need. Keep it airtight above, because otherwise you have the wind in there, you have the oxygen in there, and then your silage is deteriorating in the back here. The same here, you see the tires on the top. This is the airtight ceiling to continue having it airtight. The same here, so not open too far. So question, does this silo pit look good? Well, if you look at it from this angle, the cut looks decent. The airtight ceiling on top looks good, but that's only what we can see with our eyes. If we go one step further, and if we look at the thermal image, this is actually the thermal image of this silo pit. What we see here is the red zone is the warm zone. The more reddish or the more whitish, the hotter, the more blue, the colder. Which means we have in the top layer, we have a reheating, which is especially for corn silage, but also grass silage, especially if it's dry. There you see the reheating. We also see the reheating down here, as we can see on this thermal image part. But the rest of the silo is fine. So these are our problem regions in this specific silo. 16.2 degrees centigrade sounds like a good temperature. Silos usually tend to be slightly warmer than outside, but only until a certain threshold. If you have 40 degrees outside and your silo pit is 40 degrees, then there's something with the quality of the silo. But looking at reheating, the temperature is possible. In this case, we have almost 56 degrees in the silo. This is reheating. This means nutrients are getting destroyed. You're losing basically money. Because the nutrient are the things that are giving you the energy, the milk later, by providing energy and protein to the animal. So looking at the fermentation process, if we have everything fine, we see under normal circumstances, if you're looking at the yellow line, we see a pH drop, and it remains low. If with silage inoculants, we can reduce the pH even further and even faster. And as long as the pH stays below here, you're good. But what also can happen is if the pH doesn't drop too much, well, we have a loss in energy and protein, and we have an increasing risk of reheating, and also an increase of pH value. Once the pH is above 4.85, we see again the harmful microorganisms in the silo. So the aim from all of us should be to reduce the pH as fast as possible, as low as possible, and keep it there. With this, we improve the fermentation and reduce the nutrient losses. Then the feeding rate. The question is, how long is this phase exposed to the nature, to air, to oxygen? Can we achieve with a high silo pit? Can we achieve the feeding rate desired? Or would it better to have smaller, but with a faster feeding rate? Depending on the temperature, we say between 1 meter per week during the winter time and up to 2.5 meters per week in summertime. Why do we need to have these different, or why do we have need to have a feeding rate at all? Because we need to counteract the oxygen intro into the silo, because there will always be slight holes where the oxygen or the air can come in, and we need to be faster in cutting or feeding the silage to the animals before the oxygen can do any harm. Especially in summer when it's hot, and I had the pleasure to be in Greece during September, where it was very warm last year. And looking at these very warm temperatures and oxygen in there, it catalyzes each other so that we will have nutrient deterioration. So better smaller silos and have a faster feeding rate, but at least adapt the silos to your feeding rate. Nobody wins anything if you have these high silos, but you feed for a meter 2-3 weeks. So if we look at silo spillage and looking at corn silage, but also high diameter grass silage. What I've seen in the Mediterranean area is that grass silage has usually high dry matter contents, so it can be regarded more or less as corn silage because they both act the same way if grass has this high dry matter content. What we can see is a reheating after a certain time if the pH is not low enough, which is usually assured with silage inoculants. But let's start at the front of the table. We do have the first one is the respiration. Respiration is the last pieces and bits of the air still in the silo pit after it has been closed. Under good circumstances, we talk up to 4%. Under poor management, we talk up to 15%. Fermentation, it's really depending on does the pH drop fast, or does it take long? Does it stay low, or does it get back up? Then silage and effluent. This is how much can the silo keep the water inside? Because with all the water leaving the silo pit, we lose nutrients. And now, last but not least, we have the aerobic storage, the aerobic stability. Because, as I said, oxygen helps to grow yeast and molds. Yeast and molds eat nutrients. And depending on the pH, we can reduce their activity, we can reduce their growth. Under poor management, without any silage inoculants, we we tend to see more and more yeast and molds, and they can eat up to 20% of your nutrients. So looking at the total calculation, we can see losses of under poor conditions of up to 65%. And 65% is not only a number, but it's also a number for money, because these are nutrients that could have been used for the production of milk. So what should we look at? We should look at the best roughage quality as possible when harvesting. We should ensure a safe fermentation, a fast drop in pH, and a good aerobic stability. We will have a look at Josilac Combi later on. This is, for example, a product that is especially designed for this. And last but not least, we should ensure with all the above measures to have a high quality of nutrients to get a high quantity of milk out of the roughage. Because if we go back, 2/3 of your ration costs are roughage. Looking at the Josilac range, Josilac basically consists out of 5 products. We will be looking at 2 specific today. One will be the Josilac Combi, which you might have heard already about. And then we will be looking at the Josilac Firm later on. Josilac Combi is specially made for uncertain harvest conditions. It improves the fermentation of the silage, and it decreases the dry matter and the nutrient losses. While we have this fast pH drop, we improve the aerobic stability. This is why, because we have different bacteria strains, one of them are working in the front that produce lactic acid to reduce the pH, to hinder all the negative bacteria. And we have another bacteria strains in there that produce acid on a later stage to have a low pH and to remain a low pH once the silo pit is opened. Because once it's opened, also for high dry matter grass, which I have seen around for example, in Greek as well, then it's also very important to have the aerobic stability. Because otherwise, because of the high dry matter content, we see nutrient losses. And because we can have this reduced pH and improved aerobic stability at the end when opening, we reduce the exposure to yeast and molds eating our nutrients. So how does it work? On the first step, the homofermentative lactic acid bacteria, they produce lactic acid. Lactic acid will reduce the pH, so we will stop the negative bacteria. And then we have the pH control, so the pH sinks to a certain level and stays there. Then the second type of bacteria comes in, and they take sugar and lactic acid and convert it to acetic acid. The eat of sugar of these bacteria is not as much as what we would be losing if you would have a reheating of the silo. So and it's not a loss of the nutrients, it's just a conversion to lactic acid and acetic acid for more safety. Because we have the acetic acid then in the silo, we can increase, or the yeast and the mold, they cannot come because the bacteria increase the production of the acetic acid more and more and more. And because these yeast and molds don't like too deep pH values, they cannot grow. And by the end, the bacteria from the Josilac Combi, they regulate themselves what they need. Once certain levels of certain acids are achieved, they will stop growing, they will stop promoting their growth or change to other bacteria. If we now look at aerobic stability, what does it mean? What you see here is a trial from the Chamber of Agriculture from Germany, which is a governmental agriculture agency. On the one side, you see the ambient temperature, which is the blue line, around 26 degrees. Then we had two silo pits. The one was the control with the red, meaning that it was opened at day 0. And then the temperature of this silo was measured. At the start, it went along with the ambient temperature, with the outside temperature. But after 6 days, the temperature rises and rises and rises. And by the end, we do have a temperature difference of 10 degrees. If you look here at 11 days, this is a typical reheating. It doesn't have to come this late. It also can come this early, but this is how it looks. And as soon as we're 3 degrees above ambient temperature, we can talk about a reheating. Looking at the Josilac combi group, in this case, they stayed low during all the time. So they followed more or less the ambient temperature. Here you can see a slight increase, but the ambient temperature increased. So there's nothing negative on the green group, while the red group is losing nutrients. Looking at Josilac combi reheating molds and yeast. On the left, you see a sample treated. There's no water on the outside on the inside of the glass. No yields, no yeast, no mold. If we look at the same corn from the same sample but untreated, we see all the white dots, which is yeast. We see the water at the inside of the glass. And if we would be measuring the temperature of the right sample, it would definitely show us a higher temperature on the left side, because the water comes from the fermentation of the yeast and molds. They will produce heat, and the water evaporates, and because the glass is cold, it will go there, and the water will drip back into the silo. This is the big difference of treated on the left side, untreated on the right. Just to give you another short excursion to a Josilac firm. Josilac firm is a product which is for aerobic stability. It's not designed as Josilac combi to have a fast pH drop in the start. It's designed for reduce the aerobic or reduce the reheating and increase the aerobic stability. So it protects against yeast and molds and thus ensures a higher nutrient content. And as all of our products, it's regularly monitored by the German Agricultural Society, which is a large society in Germany, checking, testing of all the different feed raw materials on the market. And if you succeed in testing, and you can get this certificate. In contrast to Josilac combi, we do have a 100% heterofermentative lactic acid bacteria, which means at the start they will produce their lactic acid, but later they will shift to producing acetic acid. And acetic acid, as I said before, is the acid that remains in the silo and reduces the later reheating by reducing the growth of yeast and molds. Josilac firm is designed for high diameter maize corn silo. We can also use it for moist corn, CCM, because the diameter content is also very high. And use it for light harvesters when the packing density can be reduced. But this is only for corn. For late high diameter grass silage, we strongly recommend to use the combi because of the two-sided effect. It will start the fermentation and this is very good, and it will keep the reheating, the losses of nutrients when opening under control. For all the silage inoculants, the silo needs to be closed at least for 6 weeks in order to produce a good amount of all the acids to have a good fermentation. Opening silo earlier will result in a less good fermentation. And once opened, you will have oxygen in the silo and you will never get the status back where it could have been when kept closed longer. Here, looking at the aerobic stability, what you see there is the aerobic stability in hours on the down here, 66 to 142 hours. But also looking at the acids, 26 to 36 grams per kilo. So there you can see the difference for the corn silage. How can you apply these silage inoculants? First, they come as a powder. Then you would dilute them in water and take a sprayer, like for example this one here, and put this sprayer on your loading wagon. You can see the unit here, and it sprays down here on the pickup. It sprays continuously when driving with a certain speed depending on the nozzle. The other option is to look at a higher developed spraying unit like this one here, where you have a control unit in the tractor where you can say how many liters per what time you would like to spray, and you also can stop it. So these are the two different systems, a simple robust one and a more advanced one. Looking at the summary, forage is the cheapest feed what we can have, looking at the price per kilogram. But forage quality dictates at least 30% of the feed costs for the entire year. So during harvest, during silaging, if there are any mistakes made, if the fermentation is not good because the pH doesn't drop very good, the losses made in there are for the next year. Forage is also linked with the concentrate amount needed, because the higher the quality, the less or the more milk you can get out of the roughage. Silage inoculants are not there to help or fix management issues of the farm, but they were there to maintain the quality of forage and ensure a proper conservation. So thanks a lot, everybody, for the attention. And if there are any questions, I'm open to discuss them.
Thank you very much, Timo. Thank you for your presentation. I hope everybody understood because you were speaking slowly and very clear, I think, and everybody understand. Αν έχετε κάποιες ερωτήσεις, αν έχετε κάποιες απορίες, θα χαρούμε να τις λύσουμε. Έχουμε τον καθηγητή εδώ, τον κύριο Πανούση. Είναι χειμώνας, αν θέλετε να το ρωτήσετε κάτι. Θα μπορούσατε και αυτό να το εκμεταλλευτείτε. Ακρίτας.
Ναι, εγώ θα ήθελα να κάνω λίγο έτσι για να ακούσαμε αρκετά αγγλικά, να μιλήσω λίγο, να κάνω θα έλεγα, ότι η παραγωγή ποιοτικού ενσυρώματος απαιτεί αυτό που είπε, την ελάχιστη απώλεια των θρεπτικών συστατικών, και αυτό επιτυχάνεται με τη σωστή, όπως λέμε, ζύμωση. 5 θα έλεγα είναι τα καθοριστικά σημεία, κλειδιά, 5 παράγοντες. Δηλαδή, να έχουμε πρώτον σωστή υγρασία όταν κόβουμε. Δεύτερον, να έχουμε σωστό και λεπτό τεμαχισμό. Τρίτον, να διασφαλίσουμε την απουσία του οξυγόνου, δηλαδή να δημιουργήσουμε αυτό που λέμε αναερόβιες συνθήκες. Τέταρτον, να υπάρχει η ικανοποιητική περιεκτικότητα σε σάκχαρα στα φυτά, και είχε δείξει μια διαφάνεια ποιο είναι το σωστό, η σωστή φάση στο καλαμπόκι μεταξύ κυρόδους και γαλακτόδους υφής. Και τέλος, είναι ο βακτηριακός πληθυσμός, τόσο ο φυσικός που υπάρχει στα φυτά, όσο και το τεχνητός. Ο τεχνητός ποιος είναι? Αυτός που συμπληρώνουμε με την χρήση των εμβολιαστών. Γιατί ουσιαστικά οι εμβολιαστές βοηθούν να διατηρηθεί σωστά η ενσύρωση και δεν διορθώνουν διαχειριστικά σφάλματα. Ο εμβολιαστής που παρουσιάσαμε, ειδικά ο πρώτος, ο Josilac ανέφερε λίγο σε κάποιο σημείο το συμβίωσης effect, που ουσιαστικά δουλεύει με διπλό τρόπο. Πρώτον, μειώνει πολύ γρήγορα το pH, και δεύτερον, που είναι επιθυμητή διαδικασία, προστατεύει από αυτό που λέμε αναθέρμανση, το reheating που είπε. Και τι είναι αναθέρμανση? Όταν κλείνουμε την ενσύρωση και την αφήνουμε τουλάχιστον για 6 εβδομάδες και μετά ανοίγουμε, μπαίνει μέσα οξυγόνο. Και το οξυγόνο είναι, όπως λέω πάντα, είναι ο εχθρός της ενσύρωσης. Άρα, διασφαλίζει ο εμβολιαστής από τη στιγμή που ανοίγουμε, είναι ένας ζωντανός οργανισμός, να διατηρείται όσο το δυνατόν καλύτερα, και το παρατηρούμε ότι δεν είναι αυτό που λέμε ζεσταμένο το ενσύρωμα. Το ζέσταμα αυτό, η αναθέρμανση, μειώνει τα θρεπτικά συστατικά. Τα ζώα, ειδικά στην Κύπρο, και λόγω της πολλής ζέστης, δεν καταναλώνουν τροφή. Άρα είναι διπλό το πρόβλημα. Αυτά ήθελα εγώ να πω. Είμαστε στη διάθεση του κόσμου για οποιασδήποτε, αν θέλουν να κάνουν τώρα ή αργότερα ερωτήσεις.
Γιώργο, το μουζούρι
θα σας στείλουμε και αυτό εδώ. Έχουμε βγάλει μια έκδοση στα ελληνικά. Θα τη στείλω εγώ στο Γιώργο να την δώσει στον κόσμο, όσοι δεν έχουν πάρει.
Δεν ακούγεσαι, Γιώργο. Γιώργο, βάλε το μικρόφωνο σου.
Έλα, Τάσο.
Ναι, τώρα ακούγεσαι. Ναι. Σε ακούμε, Γιώργο, μίλα άμα θέλεις.
Ακρίτα, δεν σε άκουσα το τελευταίο που είπες.
Μίλα λίγο, Ακρίτα.
Ποιο Γιώργο?
Δεν άκουσα το τελευταίο λεπτό.
Το τελευταίο που έδειχνε.
Είναι αυτό το εγχειρίδιο για τους εμβολιαστές ενσύρωσης, 14 σέλιδο στα ελληνικά. Θα σου το στείλω και με email και να το τυπώσεις, να το δώσεις στον κόσμο να διαβάσουν λίγο για την ενσύρωση.
Ναι. Εντάξει.
Βοηθάει αρκετά, πιστεύω, για να κατανοήσουμε καλύτερα. Και φυσικά είμαστε ανοιχτοί πάντα σε ερωτήσεις, απορίες.
Γιώργο,
ναι.
Από την τελευταία φορά που κάναμε την συνάντηση με το Nutribiotic, υπήρχε ανταπόκριση από μεγάλες φάρμες, εδώ μια φάρμα με 1000 αγελάδες, και το έβαλε γιατί προστατεύει το πεπτικό σύστημα και το εντερικό σύστημα των αγελάδων, σαν ισορροπιστής πιο νέας γενιάς. Αυτοί είναι ισορροπιστές οι οποίες έχουν τεράστια επίδραση στην υγεία των αγελάδων. Οπότε, σε συνδυασμό Dairy Pilot και το Nutribiotic, έχουμε φανταστικά αποτελέσματα αυτή τη στιγμή, ειδικά τώρα αυτή την περίοδο. Και σε συνδυασμό τώρα με μια καλή ενσύρωση, που είναι, νομίζω, ήδη έχει εμπειρία η Κύπρος από τους εμβολιαστές και κάνει καλή δουλειά, γενικά που έχουμε δει, θα μπορέσει να γίνει και φέτος καλή δουλειά.
Εντάξει.
Πρέπει να έρθει ο καθηγητής. Πρέπει να έρθει ο καθηγητής στην Κύπρο. Άμα δεν έρθει ο καθηγητής.
Θα στοιχώσουμε 100 κιλά αναγελάδα.
Ο κορονοϊός φέτος μας έφερε αρνητικά αποτελέσματα. Εντάξει.
Δυστυχώς.
Πρέπει να φάμε προβατίνα και να πιούμε ζυβανία, αλλιώς δεν γίνεται τίποτα.
Και χαλούμε.
Σίγουρα.
Ναι, χαλούμε οπωσδήποτε, εντάξει. Απλά δεν είναι όλα τα χαλούμια το ίδιο. Έχει ο Γιώργος ειδικά χαλούμια. Από αυτά, ναι. Αυτά μόνο στην Κύπρο τα τρως. Και άμα τυχώς σου δώσουν και κάτι λίγο, μπορεί να πάρεις και καμιά φορά να φας και λίγο εδώ στην Ελλάδα.
Ναι.
Τώρα, ειδικά που έχει και πανδημία, έχουν γίνει πιο ωραία τα γάλα. Έχουν βελτιωθεί.
Εντάξει, εμείς εδώ στην Κύπρο, λόγω της ηλιοφάνειας, η διαφορά φαίνεται στο γάλα, η ποιότητα.
Ακριβώς, έτσι. Λοιπόν, εάν δεν έχουμε κάποια άλλη ερώτηση, θα ήθελα να ευχαριστήσω όλους και να προχωρήσουμε σύντομα σε άλλη εκδήλωση. Ό,τι χρειαστούν, εννοείται ότι και με 2 άτομα και 3 άτομα, Γιώργο, αν χρειαστεί κάποια υποστήριξη, πρέπει να την προσπαθήσουμε φέτος με την πανδημία να βοηθήσουμε και να υποστηρίξουμε τους κτηνοτρόφους, έτσι, και από μακριά, όσο μπορούμε. So, we thank you, Timo. We thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I say that if they have any questions after the event, we can do it also in a private mode, okay?
Yes, anytime.
So, we are available at any time, or our zootechnicians, or our agriculturalists of the company, and Akritas, everybody, our dear professor, Nikolas Panousis. Thank you very much all, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Γεια χαρά σε όλη την Κύπρο.
Γεια.